I often hear about time travel, and once we travel together, there is actually a stranger from the same hometown. Zhang Sijiu, who was originally a bit confused, calmed down. After pointing out the way for her fellow villagers to be deceived, she also went to familiarize herself with her new identity. Well, only 8 years old. What? Startled news of difficult childbirth and mother's life hanging on the line. After finally rescuing one, Zhang Sijiu took the initiative to shoulder the responsibility of supporting the family. What to do if a newborn has no milk to eat? Dr. Zhang rolled up his sleeves and said, "I'll do it." What should a big family do if their livelihood is difficult? Dr. Zhang rolled up his sleeves. What should we do if the medical environment in Song Dynasty is poor? Dr. Zhang rolled up his sleeves again. Zhang Sijiu is full of confidence. As long as I memorize medical books fast enough, it will not catch up with me in all difficulties. As for the fellow villagers, Zhang Sijiu politely asked. May I ask if you are willing to sacrifice yourself for medicine? Keywords of the novel. De Song Yi Dao No Pop-ups, De Song Yi Dao TXT Complete Collection Download, De Song Yi Dao Latest Chapter Reading. Chapter 1. Who are you? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Who are you? In the darkness, there is a bustling traffic. On the elevated bridge, the car lights form a brilliant surging river of lights. People gather here and scatter in all directions. With a few loud noises, an ambulance and a small car fell off the elevated bridge together, plunging into the cold and dark river with a loud splash, splashing huge waves. Zhang Sijiu felt like he had fallen into a drum washing machine, spinning at high speed and breaking apart. Finally losing consciousness. Recovery is due to cold and choking on water. Before she could open her eyes, she realized where she was. Surrounded by water, she was sinking. She looked at the light above her head and quickly stretched out her limbs, ready to float. A string of bubbles emerged from below. She lowered her head and saw a 10-something child 5 meters away from her. The light in the water is not good, making it difficult to see your face clearly. After slightly calculating the amount of time he could hold on, Zhang Sijiu resolutely descended. Fortunately, she knows how to swim, otherwise even if she sees it, she won't be able to save it. The child has lost consciousness, saving Zhang Sijiu a lot of trouble. After grabbing him, Zhang Sijiu quickly floated up. When her lungs were about to burst and her head began to ache, she finally surfaced and took a big breath with her mouth open. Everything began to slowly slow down, although the nose and trachea were still burning with pain. But that was caused by choking on water, it doesn't matter. Zhang Sijiu also lifted the child's face out of the water. Although still unconscious, his survival instinct also made him breathe quickly. Zhang Sijiu breathed a sigh of relief and looked around. Raindrops mercilessly fall from the sky, and the water flows a bit quickly. They are not far from the riverbank. There are still some people on the river, and at the same time, we can see a wooden boat with its bottom facing upwards. She dared not stay any longer and swam towards the riverbank with her child in her arms. Someone is shouting over there. Just as he swam out for a while, the child woke up and almost instinctively started moving. Zhang Sijiu was almost exhausted and didn't want to talk nonsense. He shouted directly, "Don't move." The child did not move as expected. And he started to relax his limbs, even helping to kick the water together. Zhang Sijiu breathed a sigh of relief. Before exhausting their energy, Zhang Sijiu and the child finally stepped on the mud and sand by the river. She let go of the little boy and gasped, "Step up." The child not only stood up obediently on his own, but also helped Zhang Sijiu in turn, clearly knowing that Zhang Sijiu's stamina was almost depleted. After completely landing on the shore, Zhang Sijiu almost collapsed and sat down, panting uncontrollably, while also feeling a bit confused. She looked around, but her gaze paused. No, where is the cement road? Where is the guardrail? What about the elevated bridge? And why is it getting bright? Although the sky was gloomy and windy and rainy, she was certain that it was daytime now. Looking around, the broad river was swept by strong winds and waves, while the reeds on the shore were lush and lush. Without seeing any cars or roads, they looked completely undeveloped in their original form. Zhang Sijiu opened her mouth. Even though her personality was always calm, she couldn't help but be surprised and said, "What's the situation?" She turned her head and stared fiercely at the rescued child. "Child, do you know where this is?" The child is chubby, with a round face and big eyes, well-developed facial features, dressed in hanfu, and even tied his hair. Yes, it's the kind of meatball head in ancient paintings. At this moment, he also had a shocked and confused expression on his face. After gulping down a mouthful of water, he shook his head and slowly lowered his head to look at himself. After a scream, accompanied by a strong emotional, lying in a groove, the child looked like he had seen a ghost. He kept lying down like a repeating machine. Zhang Sijiu's mouth twitched and said, "What has stimulated this child?" Also, the sleeping trough. She couldn't help but look up and down at the other person, hesitated for a moment, and politely asked, "Are you a boy or a girl?" The other party suddenly shook, their eyes widened, and then he made an unusually lewd gesture. Obviously, he touched something and took a long sigh of relief. He collapsed to the ground like soft noodles and murmured to himself, "It's okay, okay, okay." Zhang Sijiu watched the whole process without saying anything for a moment. It has to be said that due to this small incident, Zhang Sijiu felt that his inner shock and turmoil had calmed down a lot. Then, she suddenly thought of a question and froze completely. Difficulty lowered her head to take a look at her own body, carrying the shock of herself becoming a child. She stiffly touched her face and found that she couldn't see anything. After that, she silently turned around and made a lewd gesture like the other person. Then, there was a long sigh of relief. Although it is theoretically more convenient to be a man in life, after being a woman for so many years, she believes it is better not to easily switch. Being a woman is quite good. Koan is so big that it can't be stewed in one pot. The other party suddenly spoke softly. Zhang Sijiu turned around and met the other person's hesitant and slightly excited gaze. Then he raised his eyebrows, feeling that not only was this thing quite magical, but even this person was also very magical. But she still met the other party's secret code. "Peng is so big, we need 2 barbecue grills." Einstein. The other person's eyes lit up 3 times, and it felt like they had seen some family member. I even rubbed my hands excitedly. Zhang Sijiu calmly replied, "Madame Curie." Seeing the other person still wanting to ask, Zhang Sijiu quickly snatched the words and said, "Who are you? Where is this?" The other party choked for a moment and finally remembered that it was not time to play with codes. "I don't know. My name is Yang Yuanding. You may not believe it when you say it, but just now I was an adult strong man at 185. "Me too," Zhang Sijiu said concisely. Yang Yuanding's eyes widened and he said, "Brother. Are you also a strong adult in 185? So you are much more miserable than me. You look like a little girl now." He looked up and down at Zhang Sijiu, his eyes filled with sympathy. Zhang Sijiu. I really want to send him to the neurology department for a good CT scan. See if the incoming water has compressed the brain nerves. What logical barriers have been caused? She raised her hand and rubbed her still painful head, patiently explaining, "I mean the situation is the same, I mean the situation." Yang Yuanding exclaimed, "Oh," his gaze surprisingly regretful. Zhang Sijiu. Perhaps it should be transferred to the psychiatric department. Fortunately, Yang Yuanding quickly withdrew his gaze and said sorrowfully, "I feel like we've traveled through time, don't you think?" He added, "You said we can jump back into the water now, can we still go back?" After a pause, he demanded again, "No, you can't pinch me. How do I feel like I'm dreaming? Maybe I'm in a coma and then I have hallucinations." Zhang Sijiu felt that under the other party's nagging, his unease and shock had completely dissipated to the point where there was no residue left. She suddenly didn't know whether to pinch him first or shake his head to control the water. If there is anything in the world that is more terrifying than time travel, then it must be staying with a 185-year-old talker. The new book is open, don't miss it as you pass by. Faced with my expectant gaze, why don't you bookmark it, leave a message, and praise it along the way. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. What to do. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. What to do. But there are also benefits to being talkative. With almost no time for Zhang Sijiu to analyze, Yang Yuanding had already finished explaining their current situation. Before I came over, I was on an elevated bridge. At that time, my car was hit and fell directly from the elevated bridge. Perhaps this is the reason for crossing. I was unconscious at the time and didn't know anything. When I woke up, I was dragged on the water by you. What about you? However, although Yang Yuanding was just a question, he didn't give Zhang Sijiu the time to speak. Do you think we should try and see if we can die back? But I don't think so. What do you think? Yang Yuanding continued to mutter to himself, since I can't go back, I have to think about how to survive. Oh, I don't know where this place is. It looks like ancient clothes, but I don't know which dynasty it is. And it looks like your family is much poorer than mine. Your clothes are all patched, and your hair is burnt yellow. Zhang Sijiu, whose hair was burnt yellow, didn't want to talk to him. By the way, even when I read novels, I claim to be able to inherit memories. How come I have no impression at all? Do you have one? Yang Yuanding finally realized that he was speaking too fast this time, so he eagerly waited for Zhang Sijiu to reply to him. Zhang Sijiu, who originally didn't want to talk to him, said. Forget it, what's bothering you? She carefully felt it and then shook her head, saying, there is no extra memory. Yang Yuanding exclaimed with a bitter face, it's over now. Isn't that to help? Do you think we'll be burned to death? After a moment of silence, Zhang Sijiu couldn't bear his noise and said, you can pretend to be sick. Yang Yuanding was taken aback and said, do you pretend to have amnesia? But I didn't hit my head either. How about I hit my head? He is obviously an action-oriented person, and as soon as he finished speaking, he began to look down for stones. Zhang Sijiu silently looked up at the sky, his tone rarely tinged with a hint of disgust. Children who are frightened are prone to stress reactions. This is what people call losing their souls. But this is actually a protective mechanism for the mind to prevent mental breakdown and becoming insane. You can just pretend to be foolish, pretend to lose your soul, and wait until you understand the situation before recovering. Yang Yuanding looked excited and said, wow. Brother, you know so much. What industry are you in? Brother Zhang Sijiu remained silent for 3 seconds and uttered 2 cold words. Doctor. However, at the next moment, Yang Yuanding encountered many questions. Doctor. I heard that doctors have particularly high salaries and good treatment. But it's just that they work harder during their studies. Is that true? By the way, are you a traditional Chinese medicine or a Western medicine practitioner? How old are you this year? Who else do you have in your family? Faced with these problems, Zhang Sijiu finally couldn't bear it anymore. Someone over there has come, like they're looking for you. She felt that she wasn't traveling, she came to participate in the household registration survey. Yang Yuanding turned his head and said, where did anyone come from? Then I really saw a few people running towards this side. Someone shouted, Little Lang. Yang Yuanding suddenly became nervous and quickly sharpened his gun, pretending to be foolish. He didn't forget to ask Zhang Sijiu, do you think I look like this, big shot? Zhang Sijiu said slowly, stay a little longer. Remember this time, don't speak, no matter what the other person says, there is no need to respond. Yang Yuanding nodded vigorously and said, remember. Zhang Sijiu twisted his head and said, shouldn't you suffocate him? Approximately. Later, Yang Yuanding couldn't help but say another sentence. Everyone has come, we still need to be stronger. Let's meet here in half a month. Zhang Sijiu did not refuse. Information exchange is very important for newcomers. Quickly, those few people had already run to the front. There were 4 people in total, and all 3 of them rushed towards Yang Yuanding. It looked like they wanted to pull him from the inside out and check him thoroughly. Yang Yuanding allowed them to pick him up, and his sole performance had already begun on the spot. Zhang Sijiu couldn't help but shake his head. This acting skill, if you pretend to be sick in the hospital, you can tell it at a glance. No way, he. But obviously others didn't notice it. And the remaining person grabbed Zhang Sijiu and exclaimed in surprise and joy, Jianyang, it's really you. You're okay. Zhang Sijiu quickly entered the stage of acting, with a stunned expression and a slow reaction. He turned his head to look at the person. Yang Yuanding watched from the side, once again admiring. Bull. Boss, this is a movie queen who has been delayed by medicine. From Yang Yuanding's facial expression, Zhang Sijiu could read the movement in his heart. I'm afraid he's not a second-rate. The 4 adults noticed something was wrong with the 2 children and immediately exchanged a glance. Someone guessed, did you lose your soul? Everyone else agreed, and then they all frowned and frowned. The person who was talking to Zhang Sijiu was even more anxious and stomped his foot. What should we do? Nine Yang's family has already had an accident, and now even Nine Yang has also had an accident. This is going to result in human life. When he said this, the person who picked up Yang Yuanding couldn't help but ask another question. The person said regretfully, Jianyang's father is gone. When the news came back, her mother was so shocked that she had difficulty giving birth. The midwife asked her to go and hire a doctor, but Jianyang wanted to go and hire Jiang. Unexpectedly, the boat capsized. After listening to all of Zhang Sijiu's words, same person has different destiny. He's a young master, but I'm so unlucky. She couldn't help but re-examine Yang Yuanding, the chosen son of heaven. She quickly withdrew her gaze. Except for good luck, there was nothing else. Yang Yuanding was also a bit confused, but looking at Zhang Sijiu's gaze, he felt a little more sympathetic. However, without any hesitation, the adults who came to find Yang Yuanding hurriedly said, anyway, let's send the child back first. It looks like they're scared. It's already a miracle that the 2 of them were able to be washed up by the waves. The person holding Zhang Sijiu also nodded with a bitter smile and said, yes. Let's send it back first. 2 groups of people hurriedly separated, each running their own way. Zhang Sijiu allowed the other party to hold him and observed quietly along the way. Most low-rise houses are built with yellow mud and thatch, and occasionally with blue bricks and tiles. They are simply rare. Moreover, with the scenes along the way, she gradually felt a sense of familiarity, as if she was very familiar and understood here, living for many years. Finally, Zhang Sijiu Road was taken to a mixed courtyard of thatched and brick houses, which exuded a hint of poverty amidst its ancient simplicity. The man holding Zhang Sijiu shouted at the door for a while, but no one answered. Finally, he scratched his head and said, Jianyang, you go in. Maybe they are busy. You have a mother in your house, so I won't go in. After speaking, he placed Zhang Sijiu at the door and gently pushed him. Zhang Sijiu stared at the yard, feeling very familiar. He guessed it should be the home of the original little girl, so she went in. The man breathed a sigh of relief, thought about the situation by the river, and quickly left again. We still need manpower over there. Standing in the yard for a while, the surroundings were peaceful and there didn't seem to be anyone at home. Finally, Zhang Sijiu began to explore and understand the new environment on his own. With the surging sense of familiarity in his heart, Zhang Sijiu pushed open a room straight away. Then I passed through a small door and arrived at the room on the far left. In an instant, a bloody smell rushed towards my face. The room is in a mess. But what's even more heart-wrenching is the wooden basin filled with blood and water, and the woman on the bed with no movement, her abdomen high and bulging. The familiar scent of mixed amniotic fluid and blood made Zhang Sijiu feel like he had returned to the hospital's delivery room. Something overflowed from the eye socket, blurring the line of sight. Zhang Sijiu walked step by step to the bed and examined the woman. Still a familiar yet unfamiliar feeling. In addition, there is also urgency, panic, and fear. At that moment, she seemed to feel a voice pleading for help her. Then, the voice faded away, leaving only her own thoughts. And the doctor's instinct. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Instinct. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Instinct. Zhang Sijiu extended his finger and pressed it against the mother's neck. Based on the faint beating of her blood vessels, she judged that the mother was still alive, but her heart rate was already below normal levels. So she tried to awaken. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? She even patted the other person's cheek. The mother's eyes rolled a few times as if she wanted to open them, but she still lacked some strength. Upon seeing this, Zhang Sijiu's heart sank. The mother's condition was very poor, and her body was extremely weak. Probably opening the blanket on the mother's body, Zhang Sijiu knew the cause. Massive bleeding. Just now, the blanket was covering it, and I couldn't see it yet, but in reality, half of the mattress had already been soaked in blood, making the mother feel like she was soaking in blood. Zhang Sijiu quickly sifted through the methods that could be used at this time in his mind. In the end, a method that was once learned in the hands of an old Chinese medicine practitioner was chosen. Stimulating the foot's Yongquan acupoint. For people who are unconscious, stimulating the foot spring acupoint is a good method, but for those who have not learned it, they can only use their fingers to tap and not act recklessly. As for what I have learned, the effect of silver needles piercing acupoints is better. Silver needle. Zhang Sijiu quickly searched the room with his gaze. In the end, the silver needle was not found, but she found a substitute. Embroidery needle. Taking the thinnest-looking embroidery needle, Zhang Sijiu began to search for the Yongquan acupoint on the soles of the mother's feet. As for disinfection. After searching around, he couldn't find anything that could be used for disinfection, and Zhang Sijiu didn't care anymore. Yongquan acupoint is located at the first 1/3 of the line connecting the head end of the second and third toe creases in the front of the foot and the heel. After Zhang Sijiu found it, he did not hesitate to use embroidery to puncture it. At the moment of penetration, the mother already had a reaction. Perhaps it was pain, perhaps it was the stimulation of the acupoints that caused her feet to move. Zhang Sijiu shouted to her again, "Wake up quickly. Don't sleep. Don't sleep." Under the continuous call, the mother finally opened her eyes this time. At the moment she saw Zhang Sijiu, the proturiant seemed to have gained a little more strength. She grabbed Zhang Sijiu's arm and looked at him calmly, then tried to speak, and she struggled to move her other hand onto her stomach. Due to excessive force, Zhang Sijiu felt a little pain. But in that moment, Zhang Sijiu understood her meaning and was surprised. Is there still one in his stomach? She immediately reached out to touch the mother's belly. Based on years of experience, she also feels that there is indeed a child in her belly. But just now, when she was looking for a needle, she clearly saw a swaddle. The child in the swaddling clothes was blue and purple all over, without any breathing or heartbeat, and was icy cold. So, she didn't take any rescue measures and only focused on the mother first. At this moment, she knew there was still one in her belly, and she also understood why it was difficult to give birth. Twins have a lower chance of natural childbirth than singletons, and the probability of difficult childbirth is much higher. Without hesitation, Zhang Sijiu shouted to the mother, release your hand, I'll help you deliver. Work hard to give birth. Only when born can the mother live. At this point, she could no longer consider whether the child in her belly was dead or alive. At any time, the life of a mother is a priority. Zhang Sijiu was unable to disinfect, so he dared not rashly reach inside to touch the palace opening. She just separated the mother's legs and asked her to exert as much force as possible. However, the fetal head was never visible. Instead, suddenly a small foot fell out. The feet are also purple, indicating that the fetus has been deprived of oxygen. And may even have died. The mother let out a mournful roar, unsure if it was due to pain or something. Zhang Sijiu shouted sternly, "Don't shout, save your strength to give birth. Your feet have come down, hold your breath, don't exert force. I will push the child back." At this point, disinfection was impossible. Zhang Sijiu saw the clean water next to him and went to wash his hands. He immediately grabbed the small foot and without hesitation, sent it back. Fortunately, the child's hands were small. Zhang Sijiu's hands easily passed through the birth canal, passed through the cervix, and sent the child back. But that alone is not enough. The fetal position must be aligned. Zhang Sijiu adjusted the child's position bit by bit, and finally touched the child's head. He immediately exhaled and shouted without hesitation, "Use force. Take one breath, give birth to the child." At the moment her hand retreated, the mother also put in a desperate effort. Accompanied by a crimson hue, the wet fetal hair finally appeared in Zhang Sijiu's sight. Zhang Sijiu held the back of the child's head and neck with his hands, and exerted force left and right to help the fetus slide out of the birth canal. Actually, it may sound complicated, but the entire process only takes about 1 or 2 seconds. The baby is a baby girl. He still has an umbilical cord attached to his body. The placenta subsequently slid out along with it. She was blue and purple all over, without breathing. But the pulse on the neck still has a faint beat. When the mother was exerting force just now, her upper body was slightly supported, but after giving birth, she fell directly. Obviously, it's exhaustion. Zhang Sijiu watched helplessly as the bright red waves surged outwards. In this moment, his mind was desperately thinking about what he could do. 2 lives. Maternal bleeding requires immediate hemostasis. A newborn baby with respiratory distress needs immediate first aid. But she is only one person. Zhang Sijiu has never had a moment when he hates making choices. But in the end, she took a deep breath, suppressed all emotions, and only analyzed from the most rational perspective who had the greater chance of survival. Being a doctor is like this. If there is a comparison between a serious injury and a minor injury, one must first look at the serious injury. And if there are 2 serious injuries, under limited conditions, the one with a higher chance of survival must be chosen. Without waiting for Zhang Sijiu to make a choice, the expectant mother's voice came out, "Child. Save the child." In fact, it goes without saying that Zhang Sijiu has also made a judgment and reached out to take out the baby's mouth. If a newborn baby is in distress, priority should be given to whether it has choked on amniotic fluid or not. At this time, it is necessary to clean the foreign body in the mouth and nose. Moreover, if you want to perform cardiopulmonary resuscitation, you must first clean your mouth thoroughly. After confirming that there are no foreign objects in the baby's oral cavity, Zhang Sijiu placed his index and middle fingers together, surrounded by his thumbs, and pressed on the lower 1/3 of the baby's sternum to a depth of 1/3 of the anterior-posterior diameter of the chest. For every 3 compressions, he blew a breath. After repeating this for about 20 seconds, the baby suddenly choked and began to breathe on its own, and even cried out loud afterwards. At the same time, there is also an autonomous heartbeat. She came over slowly. Zhang Sijiu stopped his movements, counted his breathing and heartbeat, and confirmed that the frequency was normal before taking a long sigh of relief. It was only at this moment that she felt her muscles tense all over, indescribable exhaustion. But soon she remembered her mother and quickly went to check her condition. The mother's eyes were still open and her mouth was moving gently, but she could no longer make a sound. Her eyes turned, fixed on Zhang Sijiu, trying to speak out, but she couldn't say anything. Zhang Sijiu's eyes were sore, so he went to hold the baby and gently placed it in the mother's arm. Then he told the mother, "The child has been saved. It's a daughter." The baby seemed to feel something and began to cry softly. The corner of the mother's mouth curled up, but her eyes kept looking at Zhang Sijiu. After hesitating for a moment, Zhang Sijiu finally made a soft promise, "Don't worry, she is my own sister. I will definitely take care of her." The chest of the parturient is no longer undulating. Zhang Sijiu stood in place, lifted his sleeve and wiped away a tear that flowed down his cheek, then kept busy. The baby's umbilical cord had not even been processed yet. Now is no time for sadness. After working in the emergency department for so many years, the most profound lesson she has come to understand is: never be swayed by emotions and delay any second. Because 1 second is very likely to be one life. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Understanding. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Understanding. So when the door was pushed open, Zhang Sijiu had just finished handling the baby, tidied up the appearance of the deceased pregnant woman, and sat in front of the bed, solemnly contemplating everything for today. Upon hearing the commotion, she turned her head and met the woman rushing in with her eyes. The other party was still holding a very embarrassed middle-aged woman in their hand. The image is somewhat fierce. Although Zhang Sijiu was somewhat familiar with the other party, he didn't know how to address them, so he remained silent and continued to play the role of a soul. The other party immediately noticed something was wrong with Zhang Sijiu. "Jianyang." Of course, Zhang Sijiu did not respond. The middle-aged woman exclaimed in surprise, "What is that? A child? Why is there still a child?" The woman only then noticed the child and rushed over, picked it up and looked at it. She noticed that although the child looked like a kitten, she was breathing evenly, her face was normal, and everything looked good. She looked at the mother again in a daze, only to realize that she had lost her breath. The next step is chaos and chaos. The woman asked Zhang Sijiu any questions, but Zhang Sijiu didn't answer. He just sat there dumbfounded, leaving the rest to their own imagination. Finally, while crying, the woman beat up the middle-aged woman and made her lose her life. Zhang Sijiu listened beside and gradually understood that the middle-aged woman was a midwife. Just now, when she saw that there was a lot of bleeding and the situation was not good, she was afraid and found an excuse to run away. And this woman from my own family is the younger brother's wife of the mother. Her original second aunt, as soon as she saw the midwife run away, hurried to chase her back. After all, in this situation, how can we do without a midwife? And there was originally a grandmother and a second uncle at home, who went out to pick up the body of their original father. Uncle Air's 2 children, afraid of getting in the way, were sent to Uncle's house. So, no wonder there's no one at home. To sum up, this little girl from before had a particularly unlucky day. First, I received the bad news of my father's death, then my mother had difficulty giving birth and wanted to find a doctor. She even capsized the boat, and then there was no one left. Then, Zhang Sijiu came over. Fortunately, she came over, otherwise I wouldn't have saved anyone. After summarizing, Zhang Sijiu wanted to let out a sigh. Although she is used to seeing life and death, every time she faces it, she still moves. Not to mention such a tragic situation. At the end of the fight, the midwife still ran away, but threw back the money for the delivery. Grandma and uncle also came back later. The whole family cried like something. Even Uncle Air, who looks particularly tough, has red eyes and tears that cannot be stopped. Zhang Sijiu listened silently, sympathized silently, and pretended to be stunned silently. During this period, she ate and drank water as soon as she gave her food, and besides necessary physiological activities, she stayed by the side of the baby being delivered without saying a word. Just collect information with a heavy head. It took her 5 or 6 days to fully understand the situation here. Even the people in the village were recognized. I also know that my original name is Zhang Sijiu. I don't know if it's because of this coincidence that she came over. During this period, their family's funerals were all completed, and even the fate of Zhang Sijiu and the baby was determined. Although their parents died, they still had half of their ancestral property to share. But because they are not male, their share is smaller. Grandma is in charge. As long as Uncle Heir raises them, all the family assets will be given to Uncle Heir. This upbringing refers to getting married at the age of 16. Zhang Si is just over 8 years old this year, and there are still 8 years left until he is 16 years old. Whether it's long or short. After listening to the whole story, Zhang Sijiu felt that this reason was quite reasonable and quietly breathed a sigh of relief. Although he didn't know if there were orphanages in ancient times, they could definitely be given as gifts or sold. Even if it didn't work out, he could still be someone else's child bride. Even someone suggested this to Aunt Sue, but Aunt Sue scolded her directly. She crossed her waist and cursed loudly, "Fuck off your mother. Even if I tighten my belt and gnaw on the bark, I can't do such immoral and shameless things." Since then, Zhang Sijiu's liking for Aunt Sue has exploded, sincerely believing that she is a good person. Similarly, the glorious image of Aunt Sue was deeply engraved in Zhang Sijiu's heart. The first time he felt that a shrew was also quite cute. So on that day, when Aunt Sue came to feed the baby rice soup again, Zhang Sijiu spoke for the first time, "Aunt Sue." Aunt Sue was accustomed to Zhang Sijiu's silence, and was already mentally prepared. The child would have been like this for the rest of her life. Hearing this, Ling Buting was so excited that tears almost came down her face. She quickly put down the baby, responded loudly, and pulled Zhang Sijiu to cry. As she cried, she asked, "Zhonyang, are you okay? Do you remember who I am?" "Aunt Heir." Zhang Sijiu sighed as he saw her excited and reached out to wipe away her tears. "Don't cry. I'm fine now." Aunt Sue cried even more sadly and slapped Zhang Sijiu on the back, saying, "You scared me to death." Zhang Sijiu was a bit confused when he first met a family member who interacted in this way. Aunt Sue's heart immediately tightened when she saw her stunned appearance, afraid that she might be damaged again. Don't be afraid, Aunt Heir is just too happy." She quickly coaxed Zhang Sijiu silently decided to stay away from Aunt Sue when he saw her happy in the future. However, seeing that Aunt Sue was really worried, she shook her head and said, "It doesn't hurt." Just as Aunt Sue breathed a sigh of relief and was about to ask a few more questions, the little baby started crying. She couldn't eat 2 servings of milk all day long, everything else had to be made up for by rice soup. Now that the rice soup had just tasted a taste, she stopped giving it. "Can you stop crying?" Aunt Sue picked up the child and looked at the baby's thin and weak appearance. Her high mood subsided and she said, "It's been a few days now, why hasn't it grown at all? I don't know if we can support it. After all, it's premature birth. The baby is a bit thin and weak, and even the crying sounds like a kitten." Fortunately, Zhang Sijiu carefully checked and found that although it was premature birth, there were generally no major problems. With careful care, it was possible to recover. Zhang Sijiu was somewhat worried when the mother passed away, and not only did she not have the most nutritious colostrum, but even feeding became a problem. Unfortunately, there are too few women in the vicinity who are still breastfeeding, and the baby can only breastfeed 2 or 3 times a day. The main reason is that when she gets hungry, she can't be sent to breastfeed. There are not enough people at home, and the sun outside is poisonous. She hasn't given birth yet, so if she carries her out too much, it won't work. A newborn baby has a saying called Jian Feng Chang. The basic changes will be significant in 5 days. But this is still the same as before, can we not worry about others? Regarding Aunt Sue's worries, Zhang Sijiu was very certain. Yes, I will. I will take care of her. Although young babies are thin and weak, their instinct for survival is very strong. This can be seen from her hard eating. Aunt Sue touched Zhang Sijiu's head and said, "Our ninth mother is really sensible. Alright, you can watch her more in the future. If she's hungry, you can call me. We'll take her to breastfeed." She gritted her teeth and said, "I'll cut another 2 pounds of meat and send it over later." Zhang Sijiu earnestly proposed, "Buy pig trotters. Pig trotters and soybean soup, a lactation booster, what do you want to know?" End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Family. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Family. Aunt Sue shook her head and said, "No, it's too stingy." "How do you eat that thing?" Zhang Sijiu insisted, "It's delicious." Aunt Sue didn't believe it and said, "What's so delicious about that thing? It has no meat and a foul smell." Zhang Sijiu couldn't persuade her and decided to take a roundabout approach. "Aunt Air, buy meat and take me with you." Previously, there was only one girl in the family. Aunt Sue had 2 sons in a row, and her attitude towards Zhang Sijiu was much more kind and gentle than her sons. Moreover, this matter was not difficult, so she agreed to it after many attempts. However, cutting meat requires going to town. To go to town, you have to walk 3 miles. Aunt Sue thought for a moment and said, "Let's go early tomorrow morning while the sun is not too bright. Otherwise, it will be too sunny." Originally, I was sorry for Zhang Sijiu. Aunt Sue wanted to talk about taking a car, but buying a coffin for the funeral completely emptied my family, so she gritted her teeth and still couldn't bear it. Zhang nodded. At 9 o'clock, sister is hungry. Aunt Sue looked at Zhang Sijiu's calm face, with a pair of eyes that looked extremely watery, like black grapes. However, she couldn't help but let out a soft sigh and rubbed Zhang Sijiu's head. Zhang Sijiu saw that she was not moving, so he simply picked up a spoon and fed his sister rice soup. The nutrition of rice soup is definitely not enough, but it can barely satisfy the stomach. If you want to raise this little guy, you still need to achieve freedom in breastfeeding. Not much, just eat for 6 months. Zhang Sijiu quietly set his goal in his heart. Sue Air Auntie looked at Zhang Sijiu's skilled and meticulous movements, her eyes sour, and she immediately turned her head. Although the Zhang family was poor, Jianyang was still very favored before, but now she suddenly understands a lot and pretends not to be sad, taking the initiative to take on the responsibility of feeding her younger sisters. She is so careful, afraid she doesn't want to take care of them anymore. With this thought in mind, Aunt Sue couldn't help but say, "Don't worry, Jianyang. Aunt Air will be your mother from now on. You are the same as Xiaosong and Xiaobai." Zhang Sijiu tilted his head and looked at Sue Air Auntie in confusion. Did Air Auntie think of something strange again? But she's already used to it. So let's just switch the topic and say, "Auntie, let's give my little sister a name." Aunt Sue opened her mouth and said, "Why don't you call her Shenyang?" Zhang Sijiu was really choked up by this name. Zhang Sijiu. Is this name too casual and perfunctory? Aunt Sue thought it was pretty good and said, "It happens to be right behind you, so it's easy to remember." Zhang Sijiu couldn't bear to listen anymore. How about calling it Sinan? I heard Zhang Xiuzai say that there are stars in the sky, called Sinan. And there is also something that can indicate direction, called Sinan. It's also a star that can indicate direction, and it ranks with me. She even arranged a nickname. Just call her Little Pumpkin. I hope she can grow as well as the pumpkin we planted on the wall. Summer is a good time for pumpkin vines to bloom and bear fruit. Aunt Sue was convinced, okay, this name is cheap, it's easy to support. Zhang Sijiu. Forget it, just be happy. After feeding Little Pumpkin and urinating her, Aunt Sue took Zhang Sijiu to find Grandma Yang. Yang was feeling a bit heartbroken after experiencing continuous setbacks. After barely finishing the funeral, she couldn't muster up her energy and is now lying down to rest. Seeing Aunt Sue leading Zhang Sijiu in, Yang still couldn't muster her energy and leaned against the bedside, motionless. Aunt Sue smiled at Yang and said, "Mother, Yang is doing well." Yang was taken aback for a moment, and then he felt a little more energetic. "Yang, are you okay?" They have tried to summon Zhang Sijiu's soul in the past few days, but it has not been effective. Later, when they became busy with funeral arrangements, Yang ignored Zhang Sijiu. Now suddenly seeing Zhang Sijiu, Yang felt both guilty and sad in her heart. As soon as she opened her mouth, she remembered her son and her eyes immediately turned red. Zhang Sijiu saw the old man crying and confidently said, "Grandma, I'm fine. Don't cry." The elderly person's eyes are already not good, and if they cry too much, they may deteriorate even faster. Yang's tears flowed even more fiercely. She reached out and hugged Zhang Sijiu in her arms, her voice trembling as she said, "My hard-working Junyang." Zhang Sijiu had to pat the old man on the back and said, "No fate, no fate. Grandma, don't be sad. We still have a little pumpkin." When Ling Buting talked about pumpkins, Yang paused and was really distracted. Sue quickly spoke up and said, "It's the girl left behind by her sister. Law. Just now, Yang said, why not call her Xiao Pumpkin by her nickname and Sinan by her nickname? I think it's pretty good. What do you think, Mom?" Yang thought for a moment and agreed, pumpkins are good, they are cheap, and easy to feed. In times of famine, they are also food rations. Let's call them pumpkins. Zhang Sijiu. Indeed, it's not a family, not entering a single door. The perspective on things is so unified. Sue mentioned again about preparing to take Zhang Sijiu to the market early tomorrow morning, continuing to distract Yang's attention. However, Yang did not agree with anything, saying that Zhang Sijiu was just fine and dared not go out in case he was frightened again. Now, even Sue couldn't hold on anymore. In the evening, Zhang Xiaoshan, the second uncle who went out to work, also knew about Zhang Sijiu's improvement, and it was rare for him to have a glimmer of joy and relaxation. After taking a shower at night, the couple lay in bed talking, and Zhang Xiaoshan couldn't help but say, "These two girls have really tough lives." Sue also sighed and said, "Who said it's not? Especially the little pumpkin, I haven't even seen my parents before. However, I feel even more sorry for Jionyang. You didn't see Jionyang behave like she did today. You were so polite, Zhou Dao was amazing, he didn't look like a child at all. He was so sensible all of a sudden that it was heartbreaking." Zhang Xiaoshan's attention was all on the little pumpkin. Little pumpkin. How did you get that name? Sue suddenly remembered forgetting to tell the man about it, so he learned the words spoken by Zhang Sijiu again. After listening to it, Zhang Xiaoshan also agreed. Pumpkins are good, it's easy to raise a lowly reputation. Seeing that he had the same idea as himself, Sue was a bit happy and said, "Is that right?" "I think so. Jionyang, this child, is really smart." But Zhang Sijiu, who was completely unaware that he had been praised, was working hard in the darkness to provide psychological support. Children have no human rights, children have no human rights, they need to get used to it, they need to get used to it. I don't know how long it took until Zhang Sijiu fell asleep. But early the next morning, she knew that the psychological counseling she had done all night was of no use. Watching Sue walk out of the house with a basket to the county market, she couldn't help but feel depressed. Zhang Sijiu, who was independent since childhood, tasted the feeling of having no voice for the first time. "I really want to grow up quickly." Zhang Sijiu turned around and entered the room, looking at the newborn pumpkin. He felt comforted again. Fortunately, he was already 8 years old and didn't dress up like a baby doll. It was already very good. She poked the skinny face of the little pumpkin and saw that she was sleeping soundly, so she grabbed the basket and went out to mow the lawn. Familiarizing herself with the environment outside the house. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Rural Scenery. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Rural Scenery. Grandma Yang happened to see Zhang Sijiu going out. She had originally wanted to stop him, but after thinking about it, she still didn't speak. She just turned her head and couldn't help wiping her eyes again. Jian Yang is sensible. She knows she's different now and knows she's looking for work. Zhang Sijiu had no idea about the lawsuit in Yang's belly. She walked out the door, looked left and right, and directly chose the path she had walked before. If there is wild grass, there should be quite a few by the river, right? And he also made an appointment with Yang Yuanding to see him again, so he had to go ahead and visit some places. Zhang Sijiu carried a backpack and walked briskly. It must be said that the primitive rural scenery made her, who had always lived in the city, feel very novel. Take a closer look to the east, even the things grown in each farmland need to be quietly examined and observed. Fortunately, I still know rice. I also know some crops that have already borne fruit, such as eggplants and beans, winter melon, cucumber, and loofah. Zhang Sijiu comforted himself. It's good to have traveled, the air is so fresh. And it is estimated that vegetable freedom can also be achieved. There are indeed many weeds on the riverbank, and a few older girls are already cutting them. Zhang Sijiu followed suit and also learned to cut with a lawn mower. She observed that there were 7 chickens, about 10 ducks, and 2 pigs raised at home, and Sue had to mow the grass every day. And it also requires several baskets to be cut. Since he has come over, he is a part of the family. Zhang Sijiu believes that it is very necessary to do what he can and share household chores. Just like in a department. Everyone has their own division of labor, some seem important and some seem less important, but in reality, everyone is a whole. Without any one, the department cannot operate healthily. Dr. Zhang thought to himself that as a department head, he must take the lead in doing his own part of the work well. After putting your mindset in place, mowing grass is actually a very stress-relieving activity. Especially when grabbing a piece of grass and cutting it with a sharp flat knife, a neat stubble will appear after the grass is cut. As long as the distance is well controlled, those stubbles gradually expand and become a large, neat and uniform shape, without any of the chaotic growth they had just seen. Although touching the lawn mower for the first time didn't make much sense at first, Dr. Zhang said. As someone who wants to use a surgical knife, there is a natural sense of closeness to the knife. Is that a knife? No, that's the magic wand that creates miracles and beauty. Zhang Sijiu quickly mastered the essentials of using the magic wand. And those grasses were cut down in batches, neatly stacked, making full use of every bit of space, overlapping and intersecting with each other. The backpack is filled layer by layer like this. That kind of comfort is simply irresistible. When the basket was completely filled, and even a pointed tip was piled up that couldn't fit it anymore, Zhang Sijiu finally stopped his hand, still unsatisfied. After finishing the work that was supposed to be done, Zhang Sijiu finally looked at the surrounding environment. This river is called Mianshui River, which is very wide and has a shimmering water surface. On both sides of the river are large areas of gravel and sand beaches. Occasionally, muddy areas are covered with reeds or weeds, and it looks quite beautiful. There are also some water birds flying over the river surface, or using their long mouths to play in the mud and sand in shallow areas, searching for food. It looks beautiful and spectacular, yet leisurely. Zhang Sijiu felt relaxed and happy watching. Jianyang, how are you? Someone approached and spoke to Zhang Sijiu. It's a few girls living nearby. Zhang Sijiu had seen them before, but couldn't distinguish them very well, so he didn't call out his name, just smiled and said, It's all over now. Did you cut so much grass? Everyone tacitly didn't mention the sadness of the Zhang family, only other things. However, they were also truly amazed. After all, there wasn't so much in their backpacks. Zhang Sijiu suddenly felt a bit uneasy, but still pretended to be calm and said, "Yes. The chickens and ducks at home are so delicious, cut more." "Can you carry it?" someone asked. Someone hesitated and asked, "Did your second aunt say something?" Zhang Sijiu shook his head and said, "My second aunt is very kind to me." As for the problem of being able to carry or not, Zhang Sijiu glanced at the basket and finally realized where the problem lay. The green grass with a slight dew in the morning was still very heavy. And this backpack is about as high as Zhang Sijiu's belly. Still with a chubby and plump appearance. It's not an exaggeration to say that Zhang Sijiu is more than enough to squat in. A sentence that said, "I can carry it," stuck firmly in Dr. Zhang's throat. "She can't move her back," she said calmly. A group of girls fell silent for a moment, shocked by Zhang Sijiu's attitude. Finally, the most sturdy little girl took the initiative to speak, "I'll send my backpack back first, and then pick you up. Then I'll share a portion of the grass in my backpack." However, Zhang Sijiu had already made a physical move. She pulled the two straps of the basket and tried to drag it along. "It's okay, it can be dragged." So she smiled and said, "I'll just drag it back." Although the little girl is sturdy, she is also a child. How embarrassing to ask children for help. However, everyone blocked Zhang Sijiu one after another and explained the reason with all sorts of words. Dragging it back like this, the foundation of the backpack was worn out. Making a backpack is also very laborious. If you don't know how to make it, you still have to buy it, which will cost money. Zhang Sijiu looked at the basket and fell silent again. The seemingly ordinary basket was also an important family property. We need to cherish and protect that. But Zhang Sijiu still feels embarrassed to ask the children for help. So Zhang Sijiu pursed his lips, picked up half of the grass from the basket, and tried to lift it again to make sure he could carry it. He nodded and said, "I'll go with you. I'll come back later to carry it." Zhuang disagreed and said, "What if someone else steals it?" Zhang Sijiu was bewildered. Has anyone stolen wild grass? But the grass that was painstakingly cut was really stolen, which is quite heartbreaking. So, in the end, Zhang Sijiu felt embarrassed and chose to accept help. "Would that be too troublesome for you?" "It's okay. Jianyang, have you forgotten? The two of us are the best," said Zhuang with a white grin. After she finished speaking, she felt a little guilty and said, "Just a few days ago, my mother didn't let me go out, so I didn't go find you." Zhang Sijiu understood. The little girl is not only enthusiastic, but most importantly, she also has a bit of guilt towards her good friend. She smiled kindly and said to the strong girl, "It's okay. Even if I saw you a few days ago, I might not know you. We're still young, so we should listen to our family more." Zhuang girl breathed a sigh of relief and smiled even more brightly. She picked up her backpack and loudly said, "Nine Yang, wait for me here." Zhang Sijiu smiled and said, "Okay. The little girl is so cute." Dr. Zhang was completely unaware that she was also a little girl now. Even smaller than the other party. She started thinking because she was embarrassed. How to repay this enthusiastic strong girl. Reciprocity is the correct way of getting along. A few days ago, it was scorching hot. It's been raining these past few days, and it quickly cooled down. It's so comfortable. On rainy days and sleeping days, I slept so soundly that I forgot to update in the morning. He. In the future, it will still be 10 o'clock a.m. and 6:00 p.m., end of this chapter. Chapter 7. Reciprocity and Reciprocity. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Reciprocity and Reciprocity. Zhang Sijiu thought for a long time but couldn't find a suitable gift. As a destitute traveler, she has nothing and doesn't understand anything. Finally, Zhang Sijiu's gaze fell on the pile of grass being carried out. That pile of grass is already a bit messy. Dr. Zhang had a thought. Why not? When the strong girl ran back with a basket on her back and a flushed face, Zhang Sijiu had already grown the pile of grass once again. Zhang Sijiu and Zhuang girl put the pile of grass into her backpack together, and then each picked up their backpacks, preparing to go home. After packing things in the backpack, it felt a bit heavy and pulled the person back, reminding Zhang Sijiu of the heaviest school days of his backpack. She reached out her hand and, like a strong girl, used both hands to hold onto her shoulder straps, relieving the pressure on her shoulders. The sun has already risen, not particularly hot, but one can already feel its power. Zhuang girl obviously loves to talk a lot. She keeps talking all the way, most of which are trivial matters at home. Including but not limited to her mother's favoritism towards her younger siblings, her dog is pregnant, and the sow is about to give birth. Zhang Sijiu just needs to listen. She couldn't help but ponder. I don't know if it's an illusion, but after traveling through time, I had a special connection with Hua Lao. Zhang Sijiu became even more silent. Along the way, she was taken home, but the strong girl refused to enter their house. She awkwardly twisted her finger and said, "My mother won't let me go to your house. I won't go in." Zhang Sijiu looked at her guilty and cautious expression with a smile and said, "It's okay. You should go home too. Your mother won't let you come to our house, so will you come to play with me again in the future?" She emphasized, "It's okay if you can't come." However, the strong girl didn't hesitate and said, "Of course. Jianyang, we are the best. We have agreed to be good friends for the rest of our lives. My mother only said she won't let me go to your house, she didn't say we can't play together." Zhang Sijiu nodded and said, "That's good. Hurry up and go home. Grass, carry your back home." Zhuang was taken aback and said, "Why?" Zhang Sijiu smiled and said, "Because you helped me carry grass, I want to thank you." Zhuang girl quickly waved her hand and said, "No, no, I can't help you. How could you still ask for something? But we are good friends." "Good friends should share together," said Zhang Sijiu, holding onto her palm and preventing her from taking off her backpack. The strong girl was finally convinced. "Go home happily." Zhang Sijiu walked into the house with half a basket of grass on his back. Gently pouring the grass onto the place where Su usually piles grass, Zhang Sijiu washed his hands and went to see his own sister. "The little pumpkin is still sleeping. My little mouth occasionally moves." Zhang Sijiu didn't touch her and turned around to find Yang. Yang was also planning to find Zhang Sijiu. When she saw her, she waved and said, "I'll start teaching you how to cook today." Upon hearing this, Zhang Sijiu walked towards the kitchen and said, "Okay." Yang lifted her wrinkled eyelids and glanced at Zhang Sijiu, somewhat surprised. Later, Yang entered the kitchen and said, "Do you remember to start a fire?" Zhang Sijiu simply said, "I don't remember." Yang started teaching from lighting fires. First, use a torch to blow out a red spark, then ignite the easily combustible hay with the spark, and finally add a branch and knot. Branch bumps are dry and fallen branches that, when picked up, break into similar lengths and are loosely tied with straw. This kind of firewood is more durable than grass. One teaches patiently, while the other studies diligently. Soon, Zhang Sijiu mastered the essentials and began to move on to the next step of learning. She actually knows how to cook. But limited to rice cookers. So at this moment, Zhang Sijiu was still a bit curious about the big iron pot. To make breakfast is to cook congee. It's easier than steaming dry rice. After the water boils, add rice and stir occasionally to prevent sticking to the pot. When the rice soup thickens, scoop it up with a spoon and put it into a pottery bowl. Yang's silent demonstration, Zhang Sijiu carefully watched. While waiting for the rice porridge to be cooked, Yang finally opened his mouth. "9 Yangs, you should be diligent in the future." Zhang Sijiu stared at the bright red flames and wiped the sweat off his forehead, saying, She promised too seriously and made it impossible for Yang to say anything else. Finally, Yang said dryly, "Let your two younger brothers go from now on." Zhang Sijiu roughly understood what Yang Shi was trying to say. She lifted her head, her eyes clear and bright, and said, "Grandma, don't worry. I will be obedient. Do more work and share the burden for Aunt Air. Even if we don't consider the issue of relying on others, we still need to consider whether it is too inappropriate for us as a family to burden all the household chores on Su." Yang sighed and said, "Jianyang is sensible now." Zhang Sijiu lowered his head, unwilling to discuss this issue further. To be honest, she doesn't even want to chat with others. After all, the person has already changed, it must be different. If something unusual happens, it wouldn't be good. The rice porridge hasn't been cooked yet. Su Shi has returned. I also picked up my two sons on the way back. Su's eldest son, Zhang Song, is just over 6 years old this year. He looks like his father, with a tiger-like head and a tiger-like brain. At first glance, he knows he is particularly tough. My youngest son Zhang Bo is over 4 years old, still wearing open crotch pants, white and clean, with a little chubby flesh on his face. He obediently sat in the basket and was carried back. And her mouth is very sweet. When she sees Yang, she calls her grandmother, and when she sees Zhang Sijiu, she calls her sister. Zhang Sijiu likes children like this. Su entered the kitchen and drank a lot of water before finally having the time to speak. "Today, I was lucky to meet someone from my mother's village who was slaughtering pigs and selling them. I cut a strip of pork belly. It's so fat. I don't know how to raise that pig, it's so fat." She extended her palm, her 4 fingers clasped together, revealing a strong envy. Then she took the meat out of the basket. Zhang Sijiu took a glance and was startled. "Well, there really is such a thick layer of fat." Su gestured with his hand, "Cut a knife from here, leave the meat behind, turn it over and stew it for us to eat at home. Later, I will send the little pumpkin to feed and give it to the second strong daughter. Law. She is kind and doesn't even have enough milk, so let's take the little pumpkin over to eat. We can't just take advantage of it." Yang had no objection. "Okay. You make the decision." Komatsu swallowed his saliva and loudly suggested, "Stew lettuce. I want to drink 3 bowls of soup." Xiao Bai also exclaimed excitedly, "Stew lettuce." Zhang Sijiu couldn't imagine what it would be like to stew such fat meat into soup. "Can it taste good?" Before she could imagine it, Su took out a pig's foot from her backpack and happily said, "This pig's foot has been wiped with salt and will be cooked and eaten tomorrow. Although it's not delicious, it still has a slight meat flavor." Zhang Sijiu was stunned. "I always feel that Su bought this pig's foot because of himself." She simply asked, "Did Aunt Air buy it?" Su chuckled and said, 2 coins. I'll buy pork belly and let the meat seller buy it at a cheaper price." Zhang Sijiu has a somewhat vague concept of money. A coffin costs several taels of silver, but a chicken only sells for dozens of copper coins, and 1,000 copper coins are only converted into 1 or 2 silver coins. $2, it's not really expensive. No wonder Su is so happy. After thinking about pig's feet and soybean soup, Zhang Sijiu was really a bit greedy. After wearing it for so few days, he had never eaten meat himself. "I haven't eaten white rice many times." Although meat and vegetables were prepared for the funeral, they were meant for the guests and their family was not willing to eat them themselves. Most of the time, they drink rice porridge and eat simple boiled vegetables. But will Su agree for her to do it? "Life is not easy," Jianyang sighed. "Children have no human rights, but to be honest, stewed pig feet are really delicious. We have a hoof flour seller over there who has been selling it for over 30 years in one go. The hoof flours are soft and sticky, and the soup is snow-white in color, delicious and unforgettable." See you all tomorrow, end of this chapter. Chapter 8. May not believe it, you are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Chapter 8. May not believe it. Zhang Sijiu looked seriously at Su Shi. Su was taken aback by this gaze and said, "What's wrong?" Zhang Sijiu cleared his throat and said, "Enter may not believe it. In fact, I have heard people say that pig's feet and soybean soup are used for lactation." She smiled warmly and said, "If there's too much milk and you can't eat it, why don't you eat more pumpkin? Is that okay?" However, her self-proclaimed, persuasive and reliable face fell on the face of an 8-year-old child with a yellow and skinny complexion, lacking persuasiveness. Only the strong anticipation in a pair of big eyes, and the flattery revealed by that humble smile. Su felt sour in her heart and thought to herself that no matter how she made pig feet, they wouldn't taste good. If she wanted to eat them, she could make this one. So she nodded and said, "Okay, then make pig's foot and soybean soup." "How do you make it?" Anyway, Su has never eaten pork feet and soybean soup. The main reason is that pig feet are unpleasant to eat, and no one eats them either. She asked Zhang Sijiu, thinking that he must have eaten somewhere before. Zhang Sijiu recalled the great communication between maternal and family members he had heard in the ward before and confidently said, "Why don't I come? Enter, go take a break. You can eat in a while." Having walked such a long distance early in the morning, Su's face was also visibly tired. Su still had doubts, but Yang spoke up and said, "Let Jionyang come. She's also grown up and should learn to cook. Otherwise, if she gets married in the future, she won't be laughed at." So Su did not persist any longer. And upon hearing these words, Zhang Sijiu's scalp tingled. Is it too early to consider this now? She picked up the pig's feet and said, "I'll go wash it first." Komatsu and Kobo also wanted to follow, but the Yang family did not allow Kobo to go to the ditch, so they decided to keep both at home. Zhang Sijiu walked out with a pig's foot in his hand. Now that the water in the house relies entirely on well water, it is impossible to use well water to wash vegetables. But this is a place with abundant water resources, and with the strong construction of water channels and ditches by the court, there must be a small ditch passing through every household's front and back. Not far away, there is a place where you can wash vegetables, do laundry, or take a shower and wash your feet. Yes, according to Zhang Sijiu's observation, this is a multifunctional washing point. From the dishes eaten by humans to the grass eaten by pigs, slaughtered chickens and ducks, and even fresh humans and livestock, they can all be discarded and washed. Zhang Sijiu's heart is resistant. Then she hypnotized herself. This is an oversized faucet, this is an oversized faucet. The water from the faucet can wash anything. Upon reflection, she felt that she had reluctantly accepted this setting in her heart. It's okay, the larger the faucet, the stronger the water flow, and it's easier to clean it. The two pig feet were tied together with grass ropes, and the fleshy part of the upper part had already been cut clean, leaving only the paw-sized pig hooves. In modern times, such pig trotters are the most expensive. But now, the meat is still smelly, no wonder it's being disliked. Pigs are black pigs, and there are many black, thick and hard fur on their feet. The fork of the pig's trotters did not remove any dirt. Even the hooves are still there. If there is a faint smell emanating, it is difficult to believe that this is something to eat. As a medical student, regardless of the major, it is necessary to go through the process of anatomy courses. In order to learn this course well back then, Zhang Sijiu even practiced it specifically. So now that I have such primitive pig trotters, I really can't go blind. Fortunately, when slaughtering the pig, it had already been scalded, so now the hoof shell can be pried open with a knife. After prying open the hoof shell, the pig's hoof tip only has a pink and tender appearance, which looks much more comfortable. As for the hair, it would be a bit difficult to pull it out, so Zhang Sijiu has no plans to do it now. But it's about washing and soaking, removing residual blood, and washing away dirt. Zhang Sijiu submerged the entire pig's trotters into the stream and forcefully pushed the blood vessels with his fingers to squeeze out the remaining blood. Until no matter how he rubbed, pushed, or squeezed, no more red blood appeared, Zhang Sijiu finally stopped his hand. Then she scraped off the unclean dirt on the section bit by bit. Under the treatment of Zhang Sijiu's slender fingers, the pig's trotters gradually faded away from their gray and pungent appearance, giving off a hint of white and tender sensation. Especially the cross-dot section of the pig's trotters is snow-white and crystal clear, with no trace of blood. Zhang Sijiu's fingers have turned white. But looking at the pig's feet, she expressed satisfaction. Carrying half of the pig's feet that had already been calculated, Zhang Sijiu returned home. Kanji is still stuffy, Yang is picking vegetables, and Su is cutting pig grass. 2 little boys are playing rattan balls in the yard. Zhang Sijiu walked directly into the kitchen carrying pig feet. Then he clamped the pig's trotters with tongs and sent them directly into the stove. This scene directly startled the little head protruding from the door. Komatsu swallowed a mouthful of water and looked expectant. Do you want to eat it grilled? Xiao Bai's control was a bit weak, his saliva had already flowed out, and his eyes were filled with anticipation. Then, a peculiar smell of burnt and roasted meat aroma directly interrupted their fantasies. Zhang Sijiu remained calm and said, I won't eat. Zhang Sijiu has smelled this smell many times in the operating room. Later on, he could even be aroused by cravings, and after the surgery, he went to eat barbecue with his colleagues. Komatsu rushed over excitedly and said, Sister, it's burnt. The meat is burnt. Zhang Sijiu looked at the heat and flipped his face evenly to ensure that every place was evenly burned. She didn't pick it out until the whole pig's trotters were pitch black. Komatsu almost cried and said, I'm burnt, I can't eat anymore. Zhang Sijiu looked at him and the word, foodie, flashed through his mind. Don't worry. You can still eat. Komatsu was half believing and half doubting, and his silly face was covered with the words, I'm young, you must be deceiving me. Xiao Bai is young, but his vigilance is obviously stronger than that of Xiao Song. With a tight face, he said seriously, it's dark, don't eat, diarrhea. Zhang Sijiu was almost amused. Pinched Xiao Bai's face and said, don't worry, little one. Dr. Zhang's product, whether it tastes good or not, but we will definitely ensure food safety. After saying these words, Zhang Sijiu also made another pig's trotters the same way. 2 burnt black pig feet are freshly baked. Zhang Sijiu waited for it to cool down a bit before carrying it to the edge of the small ditch. This time, both little boys sneaked away from Yang Shi and secretly followed him out. Zhang Sijiu saw them, but as long as they were not near the water's edge, he was too lazy to care about them. She focused on using a knife to scrape off the burnt black marks on the pig's feet, exposing the slightly yellowish pig skin again. At this point, the pig skin has contracted a bit, but there is no hair on it at all. After even scraping off the toe seams, Zhang Sijiu finally finished with satisfaction. Komatsu and Kobo squatted beside, staring intently. But both of them clearly didn't understand what they were doing, and their small faces were filled with big doubts. After carrying the pig's feet back, Zhang Sijiu took out the clay jar and cleaned it thoroughly. Finally, he asked Su for 2 pairs of soybeans and asked Su to chop the pig's feet open. In fact, she can also break pig feet into several pieces based on anatomical principles, but that way, the bone marrow in the bones is not easy to boil out. After washing the soybeans and pig feet with well water, Zhang Sijiu directly filled the bottom of the jar, then broke a small piece of old ginger and washed it clean before throwing it in. He then filled the jar with water and placed it directly on the small stove, lit the fire again, and began to boil. After skimming, boiling water, and simmering over low heat, a fragrance gradually wafts out. Su sniffled and took the lead in surprise, saying, Did you actually make it? Zhang Sijiu explained, I heard an old man passing by the river to rest. He said he was a cook when he was young. Sue nodded, not thinking too much at all. Try it later. If it's delicious, I'll send it to the daughter-in-law of the Lee family. Although she has less milk, if she has more milk in the future, we can also bring the little pumpkin. Zhang Sijiu silently gave a thumbs up to Sue's cautious approach to life. Learned. However, this soup should be very suitable for the daughter-in-law of the Lee family. Zhang Sijiu made a wish. I hope the Lee family's daughter-in-law's chest becomes a fountain, and she can't finish eating. If you don't believe me, I left the house in the morning and then suffered from heatstroke, but I haven't recovered yet. So, I quietly put on a chapter about Xiao Geng, shouldn't anyone notice. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Just One Mouth. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Just one mouth. That afternoon, the stewed pig trotters with soybeans were successfully cooked. With a poke with chopsticks, the skin and flesh of the pig's trotters break easily, appearing soft and sticky, without losing their teeth. The soup is creamy white and a little oil floats on the noodles in soup, which is more charming. Sue scooped out a piece of pig trotters and a spoonful of soup for Yang to taste first. Yang declined, "Second wife, you can eat it. I don't like it. If you want to give pig trotters soup to someone, of course, the more it is, the better. Otherwise, what kind of words would it be like? She's an old lady, why waste that food?" Sue insisted, "Mom, eat it. There's still plenty in the pot. Let's taste it first, it's delicious before we can give it away." Komatsu and Kobo couldn't help but start swallowing, but Komatsu was very sensible and said, "Grandma, eat quickly. Kobo and I won't eat." Sue smiled and said, "Xiao Bai is young. I'll eat one piece with him and leave another piece for Brother Shan. I won't eat the rest." Zhang Sijiu couldn't bear to watch any more and simply said, "I'll eat with Xiao Bai. Aunt Air will eat alone. Just a piece of pig's trotters, not really, not really." Upon hearing these words, Sue waved his hand and said, "That's one for each person. Xiao Bai also has one. I'll grab a smaller one." Everyone just stopped here. However, in reality, except for the 2 pieces given to Yang and Zhang Xiaoshan, Sue only picked small pieces to salvage. Zhang Sijiu looked in his eyes and sighed faintly. They are all poor and noisy. But this sad point was soon covered up by the soft glutinous and fragrant pig's feet. The pig's trotters are rich in gelatin, and taking a bite makes it feel like it's a mess. Even the soup is thick, with a bit of greasiness combined with the fragrance of soybeans, and the taste is so good that it is simply stunning. Even the almost stewed soybeans melt in the mouth. Plus, I'm so full of meat soup that it doesn't even taste like soybeans. Slightly regretful, the overall taste is still not perfect. After all, not only does slaughtering technology need to be improved, but also castration technology has not yet been popularized in pigs nowadays. But after all, it is a pig raised for a year, and there are areas where the meat quality cannot be compared to those of later generations. Fortunately, the fragrance masked the slight fishy smell, enough to amaze Sue and his companions. Sue was completely shocked and said, "Pig trotters can still do this. It doesn't seem complicated, it just requires ignition. But in the countryside, what is this fire?" Zhang Sijiu gave a reasonable explanation. The chef's grandfather said that any ingredient can be made delicious, it depends on whether one is willing to put in effort and time. Not only Sue, but also Yang couldn't help but nod and said, "That makes a lot of sense." In the past, when it was eaten, it was cooked and eaten immediately. How could it take so much effort? It was washed, cooked, and stewed. Sue said happily, "I'll send it to Lee's daughter-in-law in a moment. Take this out and give it to someone, it's not shabby." Zhang Sijiu finished his last sip of soup and said, "I'll go with my second aunt. Touch the right place, and in the future, you can take over the matter of sending the little pumpkin to drink milk." Komatsu and Kobo are also clamoring to go. Sue was so disturbed that she had no choice but to agree. Coincidentally, Little Pumpkin also woke up. Sue waved her big hand and said, "First, go to the daughter-in-law of Erju to deliver the meat, then go home and get the soup, go and deliver it to the daughter-in-law of the Li family." Everything went smoothly with the daughter-in-law of Erju. Although the milk was good, there was a hint of unwillingness in and out of the words, fearing that her son would be hungry. Sue had to say a lot of good things, even a bit humble. Zhang Sijiu watched from the side, feeling both heartbroken and helpless. There was nothing he could do. After coming out of the daughter-in-law's house on the second pillar, Zhang Sijiu sincerely said to Sue, "Auntie, you've worked hard." Sue was taken aback for a moment. Initially, he didn't think there was anything wrong, but when he heard these words, his heart felt a little uncomfortable. She freed her hand and rubbed Zhang Sijiu's head, saying, "What's there? We don't have milk, we eat someone else's food. What's the point of listening to a few words?" Perhaps sensing that the atmosphere was not right, Komatsu and Kobo dared not play around anymore, appearing somewhat lethargic. After returning home to fetch soup and giving the pumpkin to Yang, Sue did not let Xiao Song and Xiao Bai follow this time, only took Zhang Sijiu to the Li family's side. When Mrs. Li saw Mrs. Sue, she felt a little helpless and said, "Xiao Shan, it's not that we're stingy, it's just that we don't have enough milk." Sue showed the basket in her hand to Mrs. Li and said with a smile, "I didn't bring it for milk. I knew my eldest sister didn't have enough milk, so I made some milk soup and brought it over. Otherwise, the child would be so heartbroken if she went hungry." Mrs. Li was taken aback and now felt embarrassed. "Look at me. Come in and sit down, come in and sit down," she said. However, she still had a worried expression. "We have received your wishes, but she doesn't have a good appetite either. She doesn't eat much, so don't waste anything." She pointed to the basket of eggs in the room and said, "Look, these eggs are all said to be fishy and can't be eaten. If you could eat 4 or 5 eggs a day, it would be unbearable. When I was a baby, I used to eat 20 or so eggs a day, and I was still hungry. I could only drink some chicken soup, but now it's hot and can't be stored. A chicken can eat for 2 days, but it can't be held." Just listening can tell the worries of the Li family lady. Zhang Sijiu still heard from colleagues in obstetrics about cases where pregnant women eat eggs after giving birth. "But now that I really see it, I am still somewhat shocked." She hesitated for a moment before saying, "What does Auntie like to eat? Just give her some. Maybe her appetite will be better." At this moment, Zhang Sijiu really wants to take out a scientific parenting manual and let them learn it well. Although there are taboos for postpartum women to eat, just eating eggs will definitely bring various problems to their doorstep. Mrs. Li shook her head and said, "That's not possible. How can you understand that, you little doll? You can't be careless during postpartum confinement. She wants to eat that salty and flavorful dish, and she also wants to eat cornice. How can that be done?" Zhang Sijiu fell silent. "Okay, the little doll has no say." Sue patted Aunt Li's hand and said, "Let's let my sister give it a try. Maybe our soup will just happen to appeal to her." After finishing speaking, she opened the lid and showed it to Aunt Li. After smelling it, she lowered her voice and said mysteriously, "Don't look at the cheap materials, but the milk effect is good. This is my mother's secret recipe." As is well known, Sue has 2 sons and her milk has always been good. Aunt Li was successfully persuaded and finally put them into her daughter-in-law's room. As soon as he entered the delivery room, Zhang Sijiu almost got smoked out. What a big smell! And the daughter-in-law of the Li family is tied with a cloth strip on her forehead and covered, sitting on the bed breastfeeding her child. She has dark circles under her eyes, sunken cheeks, an extremely poor mental state, with a sickly appearance. Seeing Sue Sure, she still forced out a smile and said, "Miss Sue is here. Come and sit down quickly." "Li Auntie, on the other hand, approached with concern and tucked in the blanket for Lee's daughter. Law, asking, "How are you? Are you having any milk?" Upon hearing these words, the daughter-in-law of the Lee family felt a bit uneasy. She lowered her head, seeming a bit guilty. "No, no, no." Aunt Lee let out a long sigh of disappointment at the time. Lee's daughter-in-law buried her head lower. "Zhang Sijiu's scalp is numb. Stop it. Pay attention to the mental health of postpartum women. I forgot to update this thing again this morning, and now I remember. It's true that I didn't write for too long, so I started writing by hand." End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Don't panic. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Don't panic. As a doctor, Zhang Sijiu felt that he should say something. So she took a step forward and earnestly suggested, "Aunt Lee, don't panic. Drink some of this soup, and you'll soon have milk." Then Zhang Sijiu glanced at the white and chubby baby in his swaddling clothes and whispered, "The baby won't blame you either. The baby isn't hungry, he hasn't even cried." The current situation of the Lee family's daughter-in-law is at most due to a lack of abundant milk, but she can still barely feed the child, so there is really no need for such great pressure. The daughter-in-law of the Lee family lowered her head to look at her own son, then glanced at Zhang Sijiu's face full of childishness, but she tried to be serious. She was amused, and her mood suddenly felt a little relaxed. "Really? How did you know?" Zhang Sijiu could tell that the other party was teasing children. She tried to be more serious and showed the aura of the emergency department director, saying, "He's not crying. Babies can't get milk, and they also slack off and cry. But now that the baby is still trying to suck, it indicates that the flow may not be high, but it has not been cut off. This kind of sucking can also stimulate the secretion of breast milk. As long as Lee's daughter-in-law relaxes, doesn't feel so stressed, and supplements nutrition, she will definitely have milk." The daughter-in-law of the Lee family couldn't help but laugh. Sue also laughed and placed the basket on the cabinet, then beckoned Aunt Lee to fetch a bowl. Mothers should not eat soup with too much salt, so Zhang Sijiu added less salt. Fortunately, she added it early and the salt was stewed to the taste, so as not to suppress the fishy smell and be too bland. Fearing that the daughter-in-law of the Lee family might dislike the pig's feet, Sue didn't scoop too much meat and picked out a piece with skin and tendons. It wasn't obvious that it was the part of the pig's feet, so she filled a bowl of soup. The Lee family's daughter-in-law was first taken over by Xiang. When I brought it over, I looked at the milky white soup and smelled its fragrance. I couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva and couldn't wait to taste it first. Then, Lee's daughter-in-law's eyes lit up and she said, "It tastes great." After taking a few sips and then eating a piece of pig's skin that melted on the palate, she remembered to ask, "Sister Sue, what kind of soup is this?" Sue finally told her, "Pig's feet and soybean soup. It's delicious, isn't it? It took a lot of effort and has a milking effect." Lee's daughter-in-law was a bit surprised and looked down at the snow-white hoof flower, feeling unable to connect with the pig's feet. Even Aunt Lee's voice was high. "Pig feet. They don't look like it. How could pig feet be so fragrant? What a pig's foot." Sue smiled and scooped out a piece of hoof tip with a spoon to show to Aunt Lee, "It's not worth it. It's just a bit of effort." Aunt Lee was shocked and exclaimed in surprise, "Oh my, oh my. Even pig feet can be delicious. You can become a cook with this skill." Sue quickly became humble. In this atmosphere, the daughter-in-law of the Lee family unknowingly drank a large bowl of soup and even ate the soybeans clean. Now, Aunt Lee was overjoyed and turned around to go out. She picked 10 eggs for Sue and put them in the basket, saying, "Take them back and give them to Jionyang. Jionyang has suffered this time, so please make up for it." Sue quickly declined. It's really hard to refuse. When Aunt Lee finally brought them out, she quietly discussed with Sue, I think she likes to drink this soup. Why don't you tell me how to cook it later? Or I can buy pig's feet and you can help me cook it. I won't waste my time using you, I'll exchange it with eggs. Is that okay? Sue waved her hand repeatedly and said, no eggs. Actually, I have ulterior motives when making this soup. If I want to turn around, my sister's milk will be ready. Can you? She feels embarrassed. But Aunt Lee became more generous this time. If it really works, it would be a waste if you can't finish it. Just bring the kids to eat. Sue is also happy now. However, Zhang Sijiu was a bit worried about the mental state and hygiene environment of Li's daughter-in-law. After leaving the Li family, she pulled up Sue's sleeve and said, Auntie, Aunt Li's house smells so bad. Isn't she uncomfortable? Sue also knew that the smell was not pleasant, but he took it for granted. You have to endure the discomfort. You can't let the wind blow during confinement. Zhang Sijiu. I missed the science postpartum handbook. But she had to continue working hard. But it smells bad, the food doesn't even smell good anymore. In the summer, holding it so tightly, she had just smelled the foul smell of sweat on Li's daughter-in-law's body. She's a bit worried that the little pumpkin won't fit and she'll have to bite. Sue was amused and pinched Zhang Sijiu, saying, how could one be so particular about postpartum confinement? They all endure it like this. If it weren't for. She felt like she had made a slip of the tongue, so she changed the topic and pulled Zhang Sijiu to speed up her pace. Actually, it's not because the taste is strong that your Aunt Li can't eat it. It's really your Aunt Li who can't cook. Zhang Sijiu didn't actually think that much, let alone feel sad. She was shocked by the truth revealed by Su Shi and said, how unpleasant is that? After thinking for a moment, Sue gave an example. Anyway, when treating guests to a meal, her family can only have half of the dishes left. Moreover, their family doesn't have any fat people. Zhang Sijiu understood. Disrespectful, disrespectful. Sue looked at Zhang Sijiu's bewildered expression and laughed uncontrollably. However, their families are all quite good. Your Aunt Li never takes advantage of her, and she is also fair. Thinking about the scene just now, Zhang Sijiu sincerely said, I can see it. Previously, the Li family did not have a good attitude because they felt that they were not witty and deliberately made things difficult for others. After discovering that it wasn't like that, Aunt Li's attitude improved immediately. And even though they knew they were giving soup for the sake of milk, they still stuffed eggs into their baskets, which was not a loss at all. Zhang Sijiu thought about the pig's trotter soup and said, I hope Aunt Li can have milk after finishing that can of pig's trotter soup. Sue nodded and said, I'm also looking forward to it. If we can really have more, our little pumpkin will have a place to nurse. Zhang Sijiu looked up at Sue and said, Auntie, buy some more chicks. I'll go mow the grass and grow up. I'll give it to the Li family's aunt. You can also sell eggs. Raising a child requires spending money, especially when there is no breast milk available. Zhang Sijiu knows that his family is currently facing financial difficulties. So, she thought about it and decided to find a way to increase revenue and reduce costs. Not to mention the distance, it can be said that if you raise too much and lay eggs, you can also eat eggs at home to supplement your nutrition. But Sue shook her head and said, no, if you raise too many, it's easy to get chicken plague. We'll all die then. Zhang Sijiu was a bit taken aback by this news. It turns out that raising chickens is not something that can be done casually. However, she quickly realized that with too many chickens, small areas, and a lot of dirt, they were easy to infect each other, which was the most difficult problem for densely populated groups to solve. Zhang Sijiu sighed and said, Auntie, how can we make money? Sue smiled and said, there's your second uncle. You're still young, don't worry about this. Our family can still afford you. Don't listen to those people outside chewing their tongues. Zhang Sijiu looked up at Su Shi and realized. So, many people outside are chewing their tongues, right? End of this chapter.